Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins in for Mike Papantonio this week. Coming up on today's show, BP has gotten a free pass from the corporate media, but we'll be discussing the company's latest efforts to attack the victims of BP's crimes. The payday lending industry is ripping off impoverished Americans at an alarming rate, and we'll tell you why the government has failed to rein in these predatory lenders. And the GOP has formed a circular firing squad, with Tea Party members attacking the old guard Republicans. We'll tell you all about the GOP's civil war. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, you've just entered the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The corporate-controlled media has let BP off the hook, not just for their crimes in the Gulf of Mexico, but for their crimes all over the country. But we aren't willing to give the company a free pass for killing Americans and destroying the environment. And I have investigative journalist Rick Outzen with me now to talk about the criminal history of BP. Rick, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's good to be here, Farron.
I know over the years, in the immediate days following the spill and even up till today, basically, you've been one of the few people out there consistently writing about the BP oil spill. And it's not just the BP oil spill. You've written about the refinery explosions and things like that. But the reason this is still such an important story is because you have BP executives out there right now trying to basically try this case to the national media. What's going on?
Well, they've already tried it. They've begun an 800 number where they're saying that they want people to send out any evidence they have of fraudulent claims. They have gone to the federal court judge and asked him to suspend any further payments on claims while they investigate this fraudulent, and they claim conflicts of interest and all these things to muddy the water. And of course, fortunately, the court system isn't buying any of it, but they are spending almost $500 million trying to get their message across to the rest of the country. They want the rest of the country to believe that the Gulf Coast are just sucking off them and creating all these nightmares that aren't really true. And of course, having lived here and having covered it, we know that we're far from the end of this crisis.
Right, and as you point out, they're willing to spend $500 million on public relations, to make themselves look good, to set up these things, to paint the actual victims as the, bad guy in this situation. So they're willing to spend this $500 million, but they're not willing to pay out, a $5,000 claim or a $10,000 claim. And like you pointed out with this fraud line, this has actually backfired on the company. They wanted people to call in and say, hey, Joe Smith down the street submitted a claim. I know he doesn't have one. But instead what's happening is people are calling in and saying, BP, you guys are committing fraud. You committed fraud when you lied about the amount of oil flowing out of the wellhead. So this has been a complete backfire. But it's not stopping people, BP executives like Dudley, from going out there to the media, CNBC, Fox News, all these outlets, and they are able to control the message and spin the story how they want to.
Oh, without a doubt, Farron. I mean, we had Robert Dudley, the CEO, who was paid, by the way, $6.8 million the year after the BP oil spill. Got 5 times what he made the year before. And he goes to Bloomberg and Businessweek and does an interview and talks about how bad it is that people in the United States hate oil companies. That all over the world, everyone else loves their industry, but it's these ambulance-chasing lawyers and these blood-sucking Southerners along the Gulf Coast, these fishermen, these business owners that are drying them out, and they're the problem, not BP. We're the problem, which is so far from the truth.
And they're vilifying these people. Like you said, they're fishermen. They're 4th, 5th, 6th generation fishermen. That's all they've ever done. That's how entire family for generations has made their living. That's not the bad guy. Tony Hayward, I just want my life back.
Right.
That is a bad guy in this situation. BP, who refused to spend the extra money to make that Deepwater Horizon oil rig safe, that's a bad guy. And still, they're out there in the media, they're spending this hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars convincing the rest of the country, not the people down here. The people down here know. But they're making the rest of the country believe that everyone down here is just trying to get a quick payday, a couple $1,000s from BP, even though it didn't affect them, and just move on with their day. But at least the judge isn't buying it, which is a great thing.
It is, you know, but let's really look at what the facts that happened at this oil spill. It happened on April 20th, 2010. They didn't completely close off that well until September of the same year. We know that 210 million gallons of crude oil were spilled, gushed into the Gulf. They tried to hide it. Originally, they told us it was only about 1,000 barrels a day. And then they had us thinking that they could cap it in May. They were doing all these things that they were trying to act like it was going to work when all the experts...
Stuff here was garbage.
yeah, really. It was mad scientist type stuff and using robots and all that. And all the experts were telling us this can't happen. This thing, they're going to have to cap it. They're going to have to drill a second well. It wasn't until late June that they admitted that, and it wasn't until September that it actually worked. But we had 210 million gallons of crude. We had another almost 2 million gallons of dispersants, coexert, which made everything 52 times more toxic than it was just to have the oil. You know, and then now what we're hearing, and this is what Dudley doesn't want anyone to talk about. This is what BP won't run any ads on. But we're seeing there's about a 50-mile radius of that well where sea life is dead. We're seeing that we just had a report come out about the high level of carcinogens inside whales, which are the top of the food chain in the Gulf. We're seeing that there are reports on the people that work to clean up this mess, who were out there at the rig, soaking it in. You know, they're coming up with all sorts of markers that are showing that they're going to have health issues from years to come. They're coughing, breathing, skin, headaches. They've done studies, they reported it this year at one of the conferences here in Florida, that they're having a lot of depression, a lot of PTSD issues that they're dealing with. Children that are 10 miles away from the actual Gulf Coast, they're reporting, horrible health conditions, bleeding ears, bloody noses. The girls are going into menstruation much earlier than they do in other parts of the country. This thing is growing, and Dudley and BP, they want to shut it down as quick as they can, but and not let anyone understand how bad this really is.
Well, you brought up a very interesting point about the fact that in the early days of the spill, they said, oh, it's only about 1,000 barrels a day, and then it was 2005, then 10, then 20. But about a year before the oil spill happened, BP, in their own, I believe it's called Horizons magazine, they wrote an article bragging about the fact that they personally, BP, had developed a technology that could determine the flow rate of a broken wellhead on the ocean floor. They created the technology, and all of a sudden when it actually happens, they can't use it? No, and that's why the federal government has already popped them for fraud on that issue, because they deceived the public, they deceived the government, they deceived everybody. And they did that because if they truly knew how much oil was coming out of that wellhead, that affects how much money they get fined under the Clean Water Act. So again, all of this, everything this company does is about saving money, and it's saving money, or their attempt to save money, that caused this disaster in the first place. I know shortly after the spill, you uncovered this brilliant document from BP. It was called the Three Little Pigs.
Little Pigs.
Tell us about that.
Well, in the Texas City refinery, which happened in 2005, 4 years before, they had an explosion, killed 15 people, injured almost 180 people, millions upon millions, billions of dollars worth of fines and payouts they had to do to people because of the injuries. But what we found, that within their own training manuals, they created a document that they called it, not us, the Three Little Pigs, where they decided that there were 3 ways to handle the issues at the Texas City refinery. When they were doing a construction project, they were putting construction offices and housing close to the project, and they had 3 decisions to make. They could do it a house of straw, which would be relatively inexpensive trailer that you would see nothing very special about it. They could build a house of stone or sticks, which would be a little bit more reinforced, and it would be able to handle a certain amount of explosion. Or they could have gone with the deluxe house of brick, which would have withstood the blast that they had to deal with. And what the way they made their decision was they put a $1 million value on every life that was lost. And they figured out that the cheapest way in the long run for them to go was with the house of straw, so that they could suffer whatever the loss was in human life. They figured it was going to be $1 million less. That would be how much more profit they could make. They gambled with those lives they lost. But the Three Little Pig memo went international because it really showed their heart.
Well, it does. It shows that, you know, they make these formulas, and it's not just BP. The pharmaceutical companies do this. The insurance companies do this. They build in the costs. Like, okay, we know that eventually, you know, X amount of people are going to be killed, but before that happens, we can make Y amount of dollars. They do the equations and say, you know what? We're still going to make more money if we let these people die than pay the settlements and the fines, and we're still going to come out on top. So consumers be damned. It doesn't matter if we kill people with our daily operations. That doesn't matter. As long as we can make money off those graves is what they're doing.
Well, it really, you know, BP has a formula that they operate with. We've seen it. We saw it. What a lot of people don't realize, Exxon Valdez, BP was in charge of the cleanup of Exxon Valdez, not Exxon. We saw how they operated there. We saw what happened in the Texas City refinery. And what we came up with the oil spills, we saw a game plan that they use in these kind of events. They try to immediately go out after the political leaders and co-opt them. We saw very early on that you know, Governor Charlie Crist here in Florida was, you know, they gave him $25 million to help his administration deal with this. He was meeting with Tony Hayward. Mississippi, they did the same thing. Jindal in Louisiana got a little bit off the playbook with him, but because he was actually seeing oil on his shores, he had to do something to save his community. The next thing we saw that they would do, they would come in and mitigate the risk. They would come up with, you know, try to downplay the 1,000 barrels a day. This top hat was going to be the magic formula for capping the wells. You know, and they get that initial buzz from that, and then later on they have to come back and retract what they said. But the retraction never gets the same amount of play. And then the last thing that we saw was they tried to put a whole lot of money on the Gulf Coast. It's small amounts, but a lot of money to try to calm people down. They hired the commercial fishermen, pay them $5,000 a day. What they didn't tell anybody, and we were the ones that found it, was they tried to get them to sign waivers that they would never file claims. We were able to get that stopped. They came out and were giving restaurant workers checks for $2,000 and $3,000, $4,000, but they weren't paying the restaurants. They would handle the workers and get moving money out there. So, you know, what we're seeing now is now the businesses are stepping up. Their claims are much larger than BP ever thought it would be. They're trying to get out of their settlement agreement. They're trying to, and they did this very early on, and it doesn't surprise me. They're attacking the attorneys that are helping these businesses file their claims, because in the beginning, Farron, they didn't want anyone to have a CPA. They didn't want to have anyone to have an attorney with these claims. And we had to fight for that because these things are complicated. But so, you know, what we're seeing now is they want to shut it down. They want to act like there's a big problem. They want to move. They want to get their lives back is what they want, and we're not going to let them.
Right, Rick. This is an absolutely disgusting story, and you know what? There's more to cover. Can you stay with me, and we'll come back and discuss more of this after the break.
I'll be glad to. Thank you.
All right. I'm Farron Cousins, and for Mike Papantonio, we'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
Stand up, stand up.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, and for Mike Papantonio this week. If you're just joining us, we've been talking with investigative journalist and newspaper publisher Rick Outzen. We've been talking about the many, many crimes of BP. Rick, you're still with me. We've spent a lot of time talking about the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Of course, obviously, for both of us, it's very close to home. It's one of BP's biggest, national stories. But there's a lot on BP's rap sheet. So let's talk about some of the other crimes that this company that wants to be painted as the good guy. Let's talk about what else they've done over the years.
Well, not only what they've done, but they're still under investigations for other things. But, you know, that $60 million fine in California in 2005, 2006, they got their pipeline corroded and polluted the northern slope. They had $300 million fine in price-fixing propane in 2007. They're now under investigation for doing price fixing and manipulating natural gas prices in Houston Harbor, and that could have about a $28.8 million fine associated with it. They're being investigated in Europe with Shell Oil about price fixing in the gas prices on the entire continent. They got hit with $87 million worth of fines on safety breaches around the country. They're considered in most states the worst corporate polluter that they have.
And I've also seen the number, I believe it's 97% of all OSHA oil refinery health and safety violations are all, they're concentrated within 2 refineries, both of which are owned by BP. So 97% of the OSHA oil refinery citations are towards BP. And this is just 2 refineries, and it's not like we only have a couple of refineries in this country. There's 150 currently in operation. BP is clearly the biggest violator there. And as you just pointed out, first of all, it's not just oil spills. It's the price fixing. It's the refinery explosion. It's the deaths associated with them. And second of all, it's not limited to the United States. They're doing this all over the globe. And
right.
Well,
really, in the debate that we should really be talking about is, one, we need to have the claims, we need the Gulf Coast made whole, which is what they promised in 2010. They ran the ads, they showed us they were going to make it good, they were going to make it right. But we need to be discussing, should they be allowed to continue business in the United States? When you have these kind of serial crimes being created, people dying at their operations, people getting hurt at their operations, the environment that's being torn up, and fines don't seem to matter to them. You could read the interview with Bob Dudley in Bloomberg's Business Week. There's no contrition anywhere in his statement. We may have a sociopaths here running this company.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There's absolutely no empathy from these companies, these CEOs. I mean, they really do operate. If you were to look it up in the DSM-5, that is going to fit in the definition of a sociopath. They have a complete disregard for human life, no social or emotional bonds to the community. They're out here to take our money, to villainize those of us down here on the Gulf Coast who may have a legitimate claim. And the reason they're doing it, as we had discussed earlier, it's all about the money. They had put aside, I think it was about $8 billion. That's what they told their shareholders, this is only going to cost you $8 billion. We'll put it aside. Other than that, we're good to go. Let's go ahead. But now they're looking at it and they say, okay, well we could be up to 20, 30, $40 billion. And at that point, it's going to affect the stock price. So that's why they've come out and said, okay, we've got to stop these claims. Let's start by saying that they're fraudulent. And that's exactly the same tactic that we saw in a state like Florida with Rick Scott over the whole voter purge. They make people too scared. Even if you're a legitimate voter, if you've got a legitimate BP claim, they try to scare you away from going to the poll or filing that claim. But the best advice we can give people is, if you have a legitimate claim, if you know it's legitimate, or even if you have a question, call an attorney. Don't just back off. Get advice if you need it.
Really, this is what BP didn't understand, and you and I talked a little bit about it during the break, is that this spill the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico is critical to the entire South. And what happened that summer impacted businesses throughout the region. People that supplied the hotels, supplied the restaurants, supplied the businesses, they're impacted. The people along the interstate where people stayed and ate on their way to go to vacation, they were impacted. The scope of this is more than just 5 miles off the Gulf Coast. The other issue that I think needs to be brought up, and we cannot lose the sight of this, is many of the claims that are still outstanding, Farron, are ones that were filed at the very beginning. but it's taken time. Every time they've worked through the system, Feinberg, any claim that was above a certain amount, Feinberg wouldn't handle without BP's permission. And we know they didn't give permission on a lot of big claims. Then it got handed off again and handed off again. So some of these claims are complicated, but they're also ones that were there from the very beginning, and they've been drugged through this process. And I think that we could make a good argument that BP has been part of that, dragging out some of these payments because they know that there's a big price tag, and they knew they had this strategy in the bag down the way. At some point, they were going to start this, and they were going to try to scare it off and try to cut off the money before they had to pay some of the bigger claims that are out there. They haven't even paid the governments, and they hadn't started paying the states yet. And those are some of the bigger claims that are out there, and they're doing their best to try to prevent having to do that.
Well, and that's another part of the financials, is that they know they've destroyed an ecosystem. We have the sperm whales that are the most polluted sperm whales in the world.
Right.
We have dolphins, showing up on beaches. They do the blood test. They show the remnants of this core exit and the crude oil. And there's no telling the environmental damage that this has done, not just to the wildlife, but to the environment itself. Because a lot of these places where the oil was washing up, I know Louisiana is absolutely terrified by this, because it's destroyed plant life on these barrier islands. When there's no plant life to hold this sand in place, the next time a big hurricane comes through, it's going to wipe out entire islands. You're going to see flooding like never before. I mean, another big storm like Katrina would make Katrina look like a rain shower. I mean, that's the thing that people have to understand too. It's not just about the fact that, our businesses were hurt for a couple years. The businesses are still hurting. If you walk out there on that beach right now with a shovel, you can go about a foot and a half down. You'll see a line in the sand once you get that far. That's this dirty brown color. That oil's still there. Just because you may not see it all the time, it's still there, and it's still having this tremendous impact on all of us that live down here.
Well, we're still seeing tar balls. I mean, just last month in Louisiana, off the coast there, they found a 40,000 pound tar mat still there. It's still there. It's still coming up. And we still have no idea what's happening to the marine life, and which is, we eat seafood. I know you do. It's a part of the New Orleans economy is their seafood. And what are we seeing, and what's going to be the impact? We don't know. We know what it did in Alaska. We know what happened up there. And it took 3 to 4 years before they really even understood the impact of it. And now we're in year 3 here on the Gulf Coast, and we're starting to see some of it. But it may be another 10 years before we really see the impact of it.
Right. Up there in Prince William Sound, I mean, the Exxon Valdez, there's still oil. There's still oil on rocks. You're still having marine life that is deformed, that's washing ashore dead. Oil, I know they wanted to tell us that it breaks down, but it's not breaking down in the way that they think it will. And dumping that toxic core exit in there. Well, let me tell you the core exit story. Okay, the EPA came out and told BP in the days following the spill, do not use core exit. It is toxic, it is deadly, and they gave them a list. They said, here's about 4 or 5 other products that are more effective and will not be as toxic. BP then told the EPA, no, we still want to use core exit. And so the EPA's response to that was, okay. That was it. The EPA warned them and told them that this was going to make things worse. But BP, just being the corporate bullies that they are, said no. The EPA and the administration, being as weak and ineffective as they are, just said okay, and they signed off on it. So BP can go out there in the media, they can buy these full-page ads, they can go on these corporate media machines, and they can tell us that it's the fishermen, it's the hotel owners, it's the waiters and waitresses out there who are scamming this system. But at the end of the day, the only people who are responsible for this, the only people who are the bad guys, are the people at BP who continue to try to paint those of us that live down here as the bad guys. Because as we've discussed here, that's not the case. I don't know about you, but I've never killed 11 workers. I've never killed 26 workers at a refinery. You know, when I come to work every day.
I'm glad you hadn't, Farron. I just want to tell you, that makes me feel better about you.
Well, when I come to work every day, I know that the people I work for have not put me in danger. I know that my building is not going to explode because my managers wanted to cut costs. And that's the terrifying life of an employee that works for BP. I mean, is it not?
Well, I mean, let's really come to the heart of this. BP has not been hurt by this. They're still making billions of dollars. They are very profitable. Robert Dudley, his paycheck went up 5 times. He's making almost $7 million. He's not hurt by this. Who is hurt are the business owners along the Gulf Coast. Who are hurt are the families. You have a child that was born not too long ago. You have concerns because of respiratory problems that they have because you live so close to the water.
Right.
We know there are issues out there, and what the public needs to know is that this isn't over. Don't believe the hype. There is a problem. We don't know the full extent of all of it, but we still need to hold BP accountable. And if you're a business owner along the Gulf Coast, get help. File the claim, do the research. You know, there's nothing wrong with looking at the process, turning in your financials, seeing what kind of claim you have, and work through the process. You need to do it. If you in any way feel that you were hurt by this in any way, you need to be talking to experts to help you do it. Do not depend on a BP ad to frighten you off or to tell you that you don't have a problem. We know you do. You deep down know that you have it. And we need to keep hammering these people and hold them accountable for it. They are not, yes, their stock price is down, Farron, but they're still so profitable that it would never hurt them.
In the last 2 years, the company has pulled in $36 billion in profits. You know, they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on their own attorneys and their PR. They can afford to pay these claims. Rick Outzen, thank you so much for telling us this story. I appreciate you staying with me so long, but this is a story that the corporate media won't cover, and that's why we have to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Outzen is the publisher of the Independent Weekly. And coming up, the payday lending industry has been operating under the radar for years, scamming the poor without any scrutiny. We'll tell you all about it when we return. I'm Farron Cousins, and you're watching Ring of Fire.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, and for Mike Papantonio this week. The payday lending industry has emerged as one of the biggest scams in America, preying on both the poor and the young. Joining me now to talk about the payday lending scams and why nothing is being done about the problem is attorney Howard Nations. Howard, thank you for joining me today.
Good morning, Farron.
So the payday lending industry, we see them on street corners, but what exactly is it? What are they doing in this country?
This is another classic case of predatory lenders, often backed by predatory politicians, who are taking advantage of the poorest among us. This whole payday loan scam is a system by which they loan money to the poorest at rates of 300 to 700% interest. And the catch to it is that they never get off the hook. 75% of the people who have those loans in a survey were shown to make 10 loans in a 12-month period on average. And the problem is that the Pew survey said the people are so desperate that 37% of them say that they will pay any rate.
So it's cyclical. They get these people hooked on these loans. You know, maybe they need $200 or $300 to go get some car repairs, but the interest rates are so high, the payments are so high that it keeps them coming back because they can't make the payments and then go and pay medical bills. So they have to take out another loan. Is that what's happening?
That's what's happening, and this has been addressed by legislatures around the country as far as the payday loans are concerned, but every time they address it, the industry finds a way around it. For example, they have a long-term loan they call the installment loan, which replaces the short-term payday loan. The installment loan is 398% interest. Line of credit, 299% interest. Auto titles, where you pledge the title to your car, against the loan, 300% interest. And we see the effect of that. It's easy to toss out numbers like that, but we saw the real effect of it when the Attorney General of New Mexico in 2007 sued 2 of the predators. They had shifted payday to long-term loans. So Cash Loans Now was charging an annual rate of, believe this, 1,147% interest.
Wow.
So you borrow a $50 loan and you'd have to repay $600 within a year.
And these are people who don't necessarily have that $600. That's why they have to go get a $50 loan. And especially at a time like this when you have minimum wage that's been stagnant for years and years and years, people can't find work, working more than one job. I mean, these predatory lenders like this, and as you point out, backed by predatory politicians, have just boomed in recent years in spite of efforts from some states to crack down on them. I understand Texas is pretty bad with it as well, aren't they?
Well, Texas is bad with it, which is not particularly surprising. Texas does have a payday loan statute, but one of the ways that they found around it in Texas was they use debt consolidation, which is a fraud, debt consolidation loans. So the debt consolidation loans in Texas, they now have 3,500 of those operating in Texas. And what happened in Texas is they came in, they passed the Payday Loan Act, which put limits on it. So then the lenders came in and partnered with the banks, which are federally regulated, and they can exceed state interest caps. And then that was cracked down on by the feds, so they started this credit repair organization scam. They now have 3,500 of those operating in Texas, and they fought off all efforts in the legislature to cap the fees.
So whenever somebody cracks down on them in one area, they simply rebrand themselves or latch onto another industry that maybe has lighter regulations, and then when the regulations come in there, they just move on again. So, you know, the states, it seems like, and the federal government to a small extent, they're trying to do something about it, but they haven't been successful. Is there anybody out there who's gotten it right?
The place that's gotten it right is the state of Arkansas. First, they passed a 17% cap through the legislature. The predatory lenders came in and found a way around that, but then the Supreme Court of Arkansas found that their new practices were also usurious, and so the state of Arkansas is the safest place in the country for lending to the poor.
That is unbelievable. And I understand, you know, Ohio and New Hampshire have both attempted to do something about it. What's happened in Ohio?
Well, the difficulty in trying to accomplish anything is shown well in Ohio. In 2008, they banned high interest rate loans. Then the companies spent $20 million going to the public trying to achieve a rollback of that legislation. They lost by 2-1. So you would think, okay, Ohio passed that, the public is backing the legislature on this, but yet today in 2013 there are hundreds of companies operating that are making 700% interest rate loans because they've redone their lending scheme as debt consolidation or as credit repair. Another good example, as you say, is New Hampshire, where in 2008 they banned these payday loans. And then in 2012, they tried to get it passed to allow them to be instituted again. The governor of the state, acting in the best interest of the citizens, vetoed the bill. So then they passed to allow installment loans and at a 400% interest rate. The governor vetoed this auto title loan, and yet they went back and a supermajority of the legislature, the best politicians money can buy, passed it over the veto of the governor. So even when you have a politician like the governor of New Hampshire, or you've got someone like in New Mexico, where you have the attorney general trying to do the right thing, they can't accomplish it because there's just too many ways to Now, there are too many ways that they have of getting around it. It cries out for a federal regulation, but of course the possibility of getting federal regulation on this is virtually non-existent. And I think the nature and extent of the problem was best shown in New Mexico, where the court actually found in New Mexico that these two lending agencies were following predatory practices, and they found that there were $20 million owed in restitution to their customers. What happened was Cash Loans has appealed that, and Fast Bucks, the other company, filed bankruptcy. So this is a very difficult problem, and I think it cries out for federal legislation because the local governments simply cannot handle this problem.
Well, I know the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been put in place, and their whole role is, we're trying to rein in all this Wall Street, this banker greed. Are they involved with these payday lenders in any way, or are they trying to clamp down on them? Or, what's happened with the CFPB?
Well, what the CFPB can do is it's very limited. It can address predatory practices, but it cannot cap interest rates. So, the CFPD from the beginning, the Bureau had trouble getting past the Republicans in Congress, but when they finally did get it through, it's pretty limited in what they can accomplish in this field. So what we have today is we have the Federal Reserve loaning money to banks at 1%, who in turn loan it to the upper 1%, upper 2% richest people in America at very, very, very low interest rates. That while at the same time the predatory lenders in conjunction with the predatory politicians are continuing to loan money at just outrageous interest rates to the people among us who can afford them the least.
It's absolutely despicable. And again, like you just pointed out, these people can afford them the least. These companies prey on that. And unfortunately, with the Republicans that we have in power today, they're more than happy to keep people working for minimum wage. Corporations like Walmart and McDonald's are more than happy to keep people at minimum wage. So it perpetuates this cycle that keeps these payday lenders alive. We constantly have this impoverished, class in America. And that's exactly what they want. This is the America that they've been longing for years.
It definitely is. And so predatory practices proceed apace, and there's nothing on the horizon, unfortunately, absolutely nothing on the horizon that we see that's going to change it. One thing that did some good is in Texas, the cities, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas actually passed city ordinances that did not allow these predatory practices in their cities. And what they did is they limited the number of loans you could receive in a year to 5. The industry came in and complained that they've cut our profits by 90%. But then they go to the state, and they'll find a way in the state of Texas to get that overturned and to have the state legislature override the local practices, because Texas truly has, since 1994, the very finest. We're the best in everything, and we have the best legislature money can buy.
Well, it really sounds like we're not going to see much action from the federal government, and it is a state effort. But just real quick, we've got about a minute left. In your opinion, with all of these Republican-controlled state legislatures, I believe it's somewhere between 20 and 30 that are solidly Republican, solid Republican governor, do you think that any of them out there would be willing to take up this issue that's, again, perpetuating this constant impoverished class in America? Do you think any of them will address it?
None of them will address it, because these people contribute huge money to state legislatures, to gubernatorial races, and it's very easy on the local level. For $20 million, as they tried to spend in Ohio, is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket to these people. So there's a lot of money in the industry. There are a lot of politicians for sale, and that combination is deadly to the victims of these practices. And then there's the final thing, that every single time they find a way to actually stop or control The payday loans, these people will drop back to Plan B, installment loan, line of credit loan, auto title loans, credit repair, you gotta love that one. Credit repair agencies, that's what they call themselves, debt consolidation agencies. So there's so many ways around it. So the only thing that could possibly be done is to look to Arkansas as a model for the rest of the country, but that is simply not going to happen. I see nothing on the horizon that's going to change this.
And I think the only thing that's going to put these places in their place is to enact policies that make these payday lenders no longer necessary for the American public, to where we don't have citizens that have to go out and take out a $50 loan and pay back $600. We've got to increase wages. We've got to strengthen our unions. That's the only way we're going to get rid of these places. But Howard, thank you so much for joining me today.
Okay, thank you, Farron.
Coming up, Republicans have found a new target to attack, and unfortunately for them, it's members of their own party. We'll tell you all about it when we return. I'm Farron Cousins, and you're watching Ring of Fire.
Tune into Free Speech TV for Democracy Now!, a national, independent, award-winning news program bringing you people and perspectives rarely seen on corporate media.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, and for Mike Papantonio this week. The Republican Party is suffering from a very severe identity crisis, but rather than trying to solve their problems, they've decided to just attack members of their own party. Joining me now to talk about the GOP's circular firing squad is attorney Michael Burg. Michael, thanks for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I've got to ask, has the Republican Party just run out of other targets? I mean, they went after African Americans and women's and teachers and union. So now they just have to attack each other? Is that what's going on?
Well, I think what's going on right now is you have a big split in the party. In the Senate, you have even conservatives like Mitch McConnell and John McCain really are being attacked by Rubio, Cruz, Rand Paul. And it's really divisive, and it's creating a real problem in the GOP. Some of these guys like Rand Paul, what they want is they want to close down and shut down the federal government. And it's causing a real division within the party.
And they want to shut down government not because of any, big reason. They want to shut down because they are still, to this day, mad about the Affordable Care Act, which doesn't even make any sense. They have no reason to be against it other than that it came from a Democrat. And these Tea Party members are willing to just shut down the entire government over something that they just don't like because it's from a Democrat. And it really shows you just how toxic the Tea Party has become for the entire Republican Party, doesn't it?
It does. What's interesting is that they're splitting on a lot of issues, not only Obamacare, but the NSA surveillance. They're splitting on that. They're splitting on immigration. And they're all trying to move to the farthest to the right they can be. An interesting example is Senator Mike Enzi in Wyoming. As you know, I'm here in Colorado, and my partner Alan Simpson is from Wyoming. Mike Enzi is one of the most conservative voting Senate members sitting today. But Liz Cheney has now come out, and she's going to run against him, and she's saying he's too moderate, he's too liberal, and there's going to be a primary fight up in Wyoming. Just amazing that they're moving so far to the right that they're attacking and really, as we talked about, firing on their own conservatives.
They are, and Liz Cheney is actually making a lot of her campaign about running against Obama himself, which is just ridiculous for a senator. And the last thing we need is another Cheney holding an elected office in this country. That's been a complete disaster.
Well, I disagree so much with Mike Enzi's voting record, and it was funny because I have to laugh when he said, I thought Liz Cheney and I were friends when he found out that she was going to run against him. And it's also in the House. We've got Eric Cantor, who is moving farther and farther to the right, putting Boehner in a position. Again, I disagree with Boehner's positions, his philosophy, his voting record. But again, the Congressman Eric Cantor is leading those far right, the Tea Party members, way off to the track. And what people have to understand is if the government shuts down, if there is no government, they lose military services, military defense. They lose help in terms of disasters. The cities themselves don't get the funding. Medicare, Medicaid. They're talking about taking away services that are vital to the American people, and yet they're in there fighting every day to try to shut it down.
They're children. I mean, they really are acting. You know, I have 2 toddlers at home. I would not, accept this kind of behavior from them, but luckily my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old know better than the Republican Party. And that's a very sad statement, but if you look at what they're doing, they are behaving like children. We don't like this. We're going to take our ball and go home. And it really, this GOP civil war has been going on since after this last election where the Republicans just got demolished. And Karl Rove immediately after came out and said that his group, this Crossroads GPS, was actually going to start targeting these Tea Party Republicans to get them out, because Karl Rove, as evil as he is a smart person, and he's smart enough to see that people like Marco Rubio and Rand Paul and Paul Ryan are poisoning the Republican Party. And as much as it pains me to say it, we do need a strong Republican Party in this country. Unfortunately, we have to have balance, don't we?
We need a government that works, that's going to do something. And the problem is they're grinding it to a halt. And when you talk about the way they're behaving like children, one great example is Rand Paul calling Governor Christie the king of pork, when Christie was making a comment that 60% of the money that was gotten was given back into the economy, where in Kentucky, very little goes back into the economy. Rand Paul calls him the king of pork. We also are looking at people, well, remember Rand Paul, he's the one who said, look, he believed under interpretation of the Civil Rights Act that a private owner of a restaurant could deny minorities, blacks, and Hispanics entrance into those restaurants. These people are way off there. And of course, Senator McCain, Senator Mitch McConnell, they're calling them kooks. Well, the name calling back and forth is so childlike. And the American people have to understand that these Republicans are not accomplishing anything. Whether you agree with them or disagree with them, what they're doing is they're grinding the American system to a halt, and that's not in the best interest of any American, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Right, and as you pointed out, John McCain actually, he called them wacko birds. And unfortunately, that's the state of our modern Republican Party, and it does have a lot to do with the Tea Party. I think the Tea Party has come in there, and it's shown some of these older guys just how crazy their views can push people. And unfortunately now, we've given the Tea Party a stage in our political process. They've gotten a stage in the media. And, real quick, about 15 seconds, do you see any remedy?
I don't. And in fact, I think it's going to get worse. The Tea Party right now, if you're not moving to their positions, those far right extremist positions, they're going to run against you in the primary, and they're going to try to beat you and try to get you out of there if you're a moderate Republican. I don't see it changing, and I think it'll be interesting in the next 18 months to see what happens.
They're going to end up pushing themselves into extinction if they don't get this Tea Party under control. Michael Burg, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Farron.
Innovation is what helps drive the U.S. economy and keep American businesses competitive both at home and on the global market. So what happens when patents for new products are snatched up by the patent trolls? I'm joined now by attorney Ara Jabagchourian to help answer that question. We see in headlines this phrase, patent troll. Explain to us what exactly a patent troll is.
I've been tackling that issue myself. The common definition of a patent troll is essentially an entity or a business that either purchases, creates, or holds patents and then waits around and then enforces its right on that patent against a business or an entity that's actually implementing that patent into a product or a service. So essentially they're not creating anything with the patent rights that they own, but rather they're waiting around for somebody to infringe the patent and then pursue them through a lawsuit or through a licensing agreement.
And so they kind of factor in part of the big scam here with the patent trolls is that they understand, they can snatch up one of these patents, wait for somebody to infringe upon it, and then they will, try to sue them or get a settlement out, and they'll weigh that against the cost of a defense. They know that they can get more money or less money, I guess, than it would cost a company to defend it, so they make a quick buck there. Is that how it works?
Well, again, that's the perception of what a patent troll does, but first you got to look at what the quality of the patent is, meaning is the patent actually one that would be held valid in a courtroom or on a review at the Patent Trademark Office. If it's a valid patent, then the person enforcing the patent isn't looking at the cost of defense, meaning trying to measure what it's going to take that company to defend it and try to settle at that amount, but rather what the value of the patent is. The perception, though, is, and there's a lot of talk, a lot of anecdote, that there is litigation spawning from, looking just at the cost of defense, essentially trying to extract a low settlement, kind of more like a shakedown rather than a valid lawsuit. That is the perception that's driving up this whole talk about patent trolls nowadays.
Well, and it's helping spur on the conversation about tort reform, because they're trying to bring it up and say that this is causing all of these frivolous lawsuits, which the tort reformers, their favorite word is frivolous. So how do we combat that? These are not always frivolous lawsuits. I mean, you do have some bad apples out there, but that's not typically the case, is it?
Correct. The frivolous lawsuit notion has come out of the Obama administration. Right? I think on June 4th, they released a fact sheet that said, they have to stop frivolous lawsuits. Now, this is a game plan or playbook that comes right out of the Chamber of Commerce from the late 80s, early 90s, spawning from the McDonald's hot coffee case and how that drove tort reform around the country. Now, patents are a bit different in this sense. Under the U.S. Constitution, there is the right to have a temporary protection for inventors, not businesses, inventors, for patent rights. So there is then established in D.C., and now there's one in Silicon Valley, is the Patent Trademark Office that actually takes applications and approves patents. So somebody who's bringing a patent lawsuit has already gone through the process of going through a government entity and having a patent approved. So there is I would call a prima facie or a upfront validity to a patent. So this whole notion that it's a frivolous lawsuit kind of undermines the notion that the valid patent, it begs the question, why is the patent even granted?
It's very disheartening, and actually Obama has been a supporter of tort reform over the years. He has not come out against it. He's spoken in favor of it several times, and he really seems to miss the mark when it comes to not just about patents, but just in general how lawsuits are used to hold corporations accountable to recover damages for consumers who were harmed, and a corporation knew they were going to harm these consumers. I mean, that is very disheartening to hear him speak like that.
Agreed. Of the three branches of government, the only branch of government that exists for ordinary people, including inventors, small business, and ordinary folks, is the courts. They can't go and lobby the legislature like the Chamber of Commerce or political action committees. The courthouse is the only place where they even have a remote shot of a playing level field. And for them to come forward and say these are frivolous lawsuits is essentially looking to close the courthouse doors to ordinary folks, to inventors who are constitutionally protected, not as an amendment, but in Article 1 of the Constitution, the Founding Fathers provided protection to inventors, not big business. It doesn't say in Article 1, Section 8, we will provide patent protection to big business where you have over $500 million in assets or $200 million in revenues. It's to inventors. So if they're looking to close the courthouse doors to them, then you know what? They might as well take that Constitution and just rip it to shreds, because as I indicated, the courthouse is the only place where folks, ordinary folks, can go and fight. That's the only place they can go.
Well, very informative, Ara. Thank you so much for shedding some light on this subject for us. And that's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com, on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio, and on Facebook. For Mike Papantonio, I'm Farron Cousins, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.